Alright, in this video, I'm going to go over concepts of importing modules and how it relates to the different namespaces within a Python project. This is covered in the Python Essentials 2 Module 1, but it's not exactly clear. They take quite a long time to explain how these ways of importing modules affect namespaces. And I want to try and just summarize the key parts of the information to help you to understand it better. Okay, so I am just in Spyder, and we're going to experiment with a few different ways of importing modules. I'm going to go ahead and just run this empty project, and I want to show you something that you can access. There is something called globals, and I'm going to do it in the console here, and this will give you a dictionary of all of the named items that are in your global namespace. And as you can see, there's a whole lot of them. There's a way to make this a little bit smaller. I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to create a variable called G, and I'm going to set it equal to the following list comprehension: item for item in globals dot copy if underscore not in item. So I'm going to create a list of all the items in the global namespace that do not have underscores, and that will significantly trim down the list quite a bit. So I'm going to run that, and then let's take a look at G. Okay, so you can see that this project, which has absolutely nothing in it, has a few basic items: in, out, exit, quit, and open in the global namespace, and so there's nothing else in there yet. So let's go ahead and import the math module up here in our code. So import math. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and run that code. And now I'm going to use the up arrow over in my console to get back to creating this trimmed down version of our global namespace. So I'm going to run that code, and then let's inspect G again. Okay, so now you can compare it to the current value of G to what we had before. It's exactly the same, except for it has two new items in it. It has G, which is the variable we created to store the items in our global namespace, and it also has math. So you can see that what's happened here is by importing math, it has brought the math module into our namespace. So the module itself is in our global namespace, but not all of the entities that exist inside of the math module. Those still exist inside of the math module's namespace. So let's just take a quick detour and see what is it actually inside of the math module's namespace. Let's use the dir function on math. So this should look familiar to you. These are all of the attributes and methods that are inside of the math module. So we can see, for example, pi, the pi variable, sine, cosine, tangent, square root, all these things that we use from the math module. So those exist inside of the math module, those named items, but they're not inside of our project's global namespace. There you can see that's our current project's namespace. Okay, so let's try an experiment here. If I go to our project, let's create a variable called pi, and let's set it equal to 66. And further, let's print out our value of pi, and then let's also access pi from the math module. So we have to specify math.pi, like that. And let's run that code. And you can see that our output here, it printed our version of pi and the actual version, the correct number for pi, which exists inside of the math module. So importing the module in this way allows us to have two items named pi. We created our own variable called pi, and that does not interfere with the existing value of pi that's inside of the math module, and we have access to both of those things. Okay, I'm going to just go up to consoles, and I'm going to remove all the variables, and we're going to shift this analysis a little bit. Okay, so instead of just importing math, I'm going to import math as m, and I need to change this right here from math.pi to m.pi. Okay, so now our code runs good, no errors. Let's redefine our variable G to see our global namespace. I'm just going to hit the up arrow until I get back to this, run that, and let's look at G. Now you can see G looks very much like it did before, except for instead of the math module being inside of our namespace, the alias M is inside of our namespace. And if we do a directory of M, you can see it's all the things that we saw before inside of the math module, but now it's just stored in our project under the alias M. Okay, and once again, we are able to print out different values for pi. There's no conflict here. So by using the alias M, or by just importing the math module, we keep all of the named items inside the module inside of a separate namespace, either inside of the math namespace or the M namespace, and not inside of the global namespace for our project. So there's no conflict. Okay, let's go ahead and I'm just going to clear this out. And let's take this one step further. Go to consoles and remove my variables. So we clear out our value of G. Okay, so now let's change this import statement to import pi specifically from the math module. So from math import pi. Okay, now we need to change this nomenclature here. We do not need M dot in front of pi. So from math import pi. So to access that pi, we would just type in pi. Let's run this code and see what happens. Now, if you look in the output here, it says that pi is 66 and pi is 66. So before we got the correct value of pi, but now that we've imported pi into our namespace, we don't seem to be able to access the math version of pi anymore. Let's take a look at our global namespace, up arrow until I get to here, recreate G, and let's look at G and see what's in it. Okay, so inside of G's namespace, you can see we have, just like before, we have the pi variable, but the pi variable that has been brought in has been overwritten. It's the same variable that's identified here in this line, pi equals 66. Let's remove that from our code. And I'm just going to remove the variables one more time. And let's run this code. Now, I don't have the code that says pi equals 66. And you can see that we get the correct versions for the value of pi from the math module. And let's take a look at our global namespace again. Rerun this. So you can see, just like before, pi is in the namespace, but now it is the correct pi, the one from the math module, not the one that we redefined. But here's the problem. Now, in the case of pi, it's pretty obvious that you would be overwriting and using a name that you didn't want to. But when you import items using the from keyword, it brings it into your project's namespace, and it makes it possible for you to create naming conflicts, which can create logical errors in your code. In other words, it won't necessarily raise an exception, but the output that you expect may not be what actually occurs because you've conflicted some named entity from the math module. So if I add back in here pi equals 66 and rerun my code, you see I'm back to the same problem. Now pi in both cases here is equal to 66. Now, when you import using the from keyword and import specific named entities like from math import pi, the chances of creating a naming conflict is relatively low because you're identifying the specific items that you're importing, so you're going to be aware of any conflicts that you create. The bigger problem happens when people import from a module using from module import star. And let's just show you an example of that here, what happens. Let me clear out my console. And let's clear out our variables. Let's change this import statement now to read from math import star. And I'm going to delete that. We don't need it. Okay, so now this code should run and I should get the correct value of pi. Let's check that. All right, so that runs and we can see we got the value of pi from the math module. But let's take a fresh look at our global namespace. So I'm just going to up arrow to get here. Let's recreate the value of G and that's inspected. So now you see that our global namespace has all of the things that it had in it before, but it also has all of the named items from the math module. And you can see there are a lot of things in the math module. So for example, E would be a common place you could maybe make a mistake. You would mistakenly create a variable called E, and then later if you tried to use the value of E, Euler's number, in your code, it would actually override Euler's number to be the value that you assign to E. So that naming conflict creates a logical error in your code. So this is why it is generally not recommended to use from module import star, and hopefully this makes it clear to you as to how you can create these naming conflicts by bringing too many entities into your global namespace.